So maybe really what's sacred is the fact that we suck. Hello, everyone, and welcome to Irenicast, the weekly podcast dedicated to conversations on faith and culture. We are your hosts. I'm Jeff.
What's up? I'm Mona.
And I'm Alan.
We're peppy today.
Peppy because Alan is eating, I am eating chocolate covered. I don't talk about myself in the third person, okay?
You need to stop doing that. It's a terrible habit.
It is a bad one. I'm eating chocolate covered cocoa nibs from Taza Chocolate, which is a direct trade company. So better than fair trade. They say they cut out the middle person.
So basically the people that are producing it get all the profits instead of some of the profits.
Yeah. Instead of the people who are like, instead of the people who are fair trade mongers and they're just making money off the system of fair trade.
I'm thinking that the only way it could actually be direct trade is if you personally, Alan, sent an email to a cocoa grower in Guatemala and we're like, hey, give me some of that cocoa nibs. Yeah. And they sent them to you. That would be direct trade. So as long as there's somebody in the middle.
Caveat, I did not research this. It just says it on the label. So I'm taking it as gospel.
It's all marketing. Everyone starts something out of a pure heart, like the one for one. Now it's just a marketing tool. Everyone's trying to make money off the fact that they're charitable. Freaking capitalism.
Well, you know.
There's worse things to make money off of, Jeff. Okay.
Off the backs of poor people?
Well, off of us feeling good about ourselves. That's not bad at all.
I love paying to feel good about myself.
Me too. Oh my goodness.
So this weekend, what?
I was just going to say, I recently went to my 10-year high school reunion, which means I'm really young, but it was a very interesting experience seeing all these people. I know.
You're a fetus.
I am. Seeing all these people I hadn't seen in forever. It was really fun. It was like my Disneyland. I didn't even realize it would be that great. I know, right?
That's my nightmare.
Really?
Oh my God. Reconnecting with old people that were in my life. Nope. It's so stressful for me. Yeah, so stressful. I don't even know why. I think a small talk stresses me out. I'm like, I don't know what to do with my hands. How's your family?
Sad.
Why is it sad?
You're related to me. You're supposed to love small talk.
We have to be the same because we're related. That's
same.
how it works.
I'm a very nostalgic person, and so
I know. I think nostalgia's stupid.
Well, I didn't go up to them and be like, hey, so remember that time when I didn't do that at all. It was more just
what you're supposed to do.
No. I asked them about themselves, and seriously, they're all great. There was like half of my graduating class showed up. It's pretty amazing.
Okay, well, it makes a difference, though, in if you graduated from a school of like 500 graduates or 4, like yours.
Hey, there was 220, I think, graduates. And so there was 100.
That still counts as bumpkin status.
It is, but it was bumpkin. The whole town shut down for football games and stuff like that. It's true. Bumpkin. Yeah. So it was really fun. And we stayed out. We went to, it's kind of funny. We went to a bar afterward till about 2:30 in the morning. But when we went to the bar, there was another class there, but it was a class of 1985. So these people were a little bit older. So there was actually some people from our graduating class whose parents were dancing at the bar, like already kind of sloshed. Yeah, it was really funny. It was just total accident that we all showed up at this one place at the same time.
That's because you live in a tiny town and there's probably only one place to drink.
Yeah, and there was like 20 cop cars out front the whole time because there's nothing else to do in our town.
Oh,
so they were chilling there. Anyway.
So you guys know what I did this weekend? I had pasta with my friends. We had pasta dinner, and then we played Cards Against Humanity, and then we learned how to whip. You know that song, Watch Me Whip, Watch Me Nay Nay? There was a lesson.
Yeah, it's been stuck in my head for forever.
Great. And then we watched this video of the real... Okay, wait. No, first we had a 90s sing-along with the guitar. At the top of our lungs at midnight. The neighbors probably hate us. But then we watched a video of the real Total Eclipse of the Heart, the literal version. And somebody has dubbed over this video, like the original music video, and it is so funny. So we'll have to get a link to that, and then people can watch it and enjoy it because I enjoyed it. But I'm so glad that I've been exposed to this in my life now.
It sounds like a lot of fun.
Yeah, it was a lot of fun. It was a crazy night. There were shenanigans. There were foibles.
I mean, pasta is pretty exciting.
There were bonds made.
So throughout the course of the night, you essentially traveled back in time, starting in the 90s and then ending up in the 80s with a remix or a original version of Total Eclipse of the Heart.
Look at you, Jeff. You're so meta.
I guess awesome. Total Eclipse of the Heart is not a 90s song.
It's an 80s song.
I think of it as one. I'm not really.
It's 80s?
What year was it?
I don't know, like 82, 2 or 3, early 80s.
Oh, really?
Yeah.
Dude, I've learned not to argue with Jeff. He'll seriously be spot on every time.
I believe you, Jeff. I'm not arguing.
Awesome.
Well, we're all too young, I guess, to really remember the 90s. So like we just clump them all in together.
Yeah, probably. Because both of you, what? You were born in the late 80s, maybe?
Mid 80s.
Mid to late mid.
But we did rock some Alanis and some No Doubt that were both
good.
pretty epic.
Very nice.
Yeah.
That's good stuff right there.
Mm-hmm. And I say to remind you of the mess.
She was kind of like a sacred icon of the early 90s, right? I'm trying this whole segue thing, Jeff.
Yeah, that didn't.
Come on.
Didn't. Maybe. I guess so.
No, the listeners will decide whether that worked out or not.
She had a lot of religious symbology in her music videos.
On her first album, she had a really, really good song about kind of the hypocrisy on how guys were treated in the church and how she was treated in the church. It's a really good song.
Alanis?
Yeah, I can't for the life of me remember the title of the song.
Was it the one that goes like, I hope she does to you what I would do to you?
No, that's not. That's not the one at all. I can't remember the title. I'll put it in the show notes. But it's a really fantastic song. And at the time when it came out, I didn't. You don't think about stuff like that. But I listened to it later on in life and realized, man, there were some good deep tracks on that album.
I always really liked Alanis. I did.
Yeah, pretty awesome.
All right,
so sacred people.
Yes, so sacred people. So we're finishing our series on secular versus sacred with selves or people. We've talked about stories and narrative. We've talked about spaces, and now people. And I think this will be, I don't know, an interesting conversation. But you'll have to wait till the other side of the music to find out for sure.
A whole 20 seconds. Hope you
I
can
think
do
it's
it.
like 5. Anyway. So, final week on secular versus sacred. I think a good place to maybe start this conversation, I don't know, a good place, is to kind of review kind of what we've talked about so far. So, Alan, you're the one that is best suited for kind of capitalizing what we've talked about and giving us a solid base to start with. So, Alan, give us a quick review.
I think that's a great idea. So we've talked about stories and spaces. We've all kind of arrived at our definitions of sacred versus secular throughout the conversation. We didn't come at it like having this solid definition of sacredness. But from what I've heard, it seems like Jeff especially, but kind of all of us, think of sacred as, on the one hand, something being infused with meaning by people, like by a community, whatever. That's a text or a space. It is given this meaning and becomes special because of that. And on the other side, we've talked about sacred as possibly being something that ushers people into ultimate meaning. So whether that connects us with the divine or with God, if it's a space that is a catalyst for that experience or a text or whatever, that's another way of being sacred. So they're two sort of different things that are related in my mind.
So have we given up on the idea that sacredness is set apartness or holiness, like that it's special and separate from reality?
So that's a third. Yeah, that's like a third thing. And that we've tied into kind of history. People talked about sacred as being untouchable.
Well, I think that's the end result of what we initially just talked about infusing meaning. Because if you infuse meaning with something, it automatically separates itself from everything else. You know what I mean? Like it's separate because of its sacredness.
Unless everything is infused with meaning, and you can't set everything apart from everything. That's a categorical error.
True, but everything has degrees of meaning that are attached to it. So like my phone has meaning to me to a certain extent. You know what I mean? Like I've personalized it. I've done things to it to kind of give it something, but it's still not as meaningful or sacred as my family. You know what I mean? Like I think because of the experiences and what interaction we can have from it. So I think that set apartness.
But it connects you to your family. So it's participatory in that meaning.
So we've talked about everything being sacred to some extent, but then we've kind of teased out sacredness as being not just everything, but like how it shows up in everything or has the potential of showing up in everything, right?
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
Nah.
Well, I think we can safely assume that we haven't defined anything.
No, because the way that you said that, Alan, makes it sound like sacredness has an ontological reality, like a beingness, an existence, that it's its own thing. Like you could measure like the energy or the amount of sacredness something has.
I would say the but the potential to connect people to ultimate meaning is the like, observable, whatever, maybe experiential sort of thing. But then on the other side, you have people pumping meaning into it to make it that way. So it's like a both and kind of thing.
I think maybe something is more sacred than something else depending upon how many people can connect to that. So the closer something is to a universal experience, which I don't think any one thing necessarily is, then the closer that is to being more sacred because more people have the opportunity to connect with it.
Do you think there's something as anti-sacred?
Yes.
We don't have to define what that is yet. We don't have to use the word for it.
So
but,
as far as
no,
people
but seriously.
go, as far as people go, we were going to talk about how people are sacred and how people are secular. And like
no, we're not going to talk about it like that.
No. I was going to say we expect some people in our society to not be sacred, right?
Well,
they're like owned by everybody.
Before we get to people though, because we're still defining sacredness. Then if there are degrees of sacredness, then there has to, I'm thinking like on a spectrum, if you have sacred on one side and you can be closer or farther away from what sacred is, what's the opposite of sacred? Like if a place or a story of atrocity, would we call that sacred? Because it is set apart and different from reality. And it might even preserve ultimate meaning because we remember it. So I'm spinning myself in
story. No, it's okay. The story, but not the event itself, maybe. You know what I mean? If an atrocity in and of itself like is demeaning and I don't know, but the story about it and the owning of people's own story and suffering is a way of being sacred. And I think that's why all people can be sacred in some sense. In the definitions I've kind of like laid out, which whether you agree with them or not, you can infuse your own story with meaning. And that's how human beings participate in the sacred. And you can also be a catalyst for other people to experience God or ultimate meaning. And so in both senses, human beings can be sacred.
I think that the degree of sacredness within let's talk about stories and spaces, what we've talked about before, the degree of sacredness for me is considered how many people have connected to that. For instance, like if there's more of a, like I said before, there's more of a universal aspect where more people can kind of latch onto that. But to me, when we talk about people, this is where it all breaks down. There cannot, in my view, be a hierarchy of sacredness when it comes to people. People are sacred, period.
I sort of agree. I think you're right when it talks about infusing people with meaning, but communities set aside leaders and they've been doing it for a long time. I mean, like the idea of leaders.
And I think that's a problem.
Okay, let's come back to that in a sec, though.
Okay.
Let's
on the other side of it, people can be capable of ushering others into ultimate meaning to a greater or lesser degree. So it's two different definitions of sacredness that have been competing this whole time. And that's why it's kind of muddy.
I have a question, though.
Yes.
My question is, what happens when things happen or in places or with people's experiences that cause them to lose sense of ultimate meaning?
They're no longer people.
Is that an illusion? Is it an illusion that they don't have access to sacredness anymore, or that they don't properly comprehend it, or does sacredness leave because it's something we create? Or is it sometimes just part of the human experience that we don't have access to ultimate meaning, and that's just part of what it means to be sadly human sometimes?
I don't think sacredness is a separate entity. Like I think sacredness is purely created by humans.
And that's where we disagree. But I agree with you in the sense that sacredness is something that humans, because we infuse things with meaning, they do become sacred. So I agree with that. But I would take a step further and say there is, like God exists. And I do believe that there are ways that human beings connect or commune with God that are different than other ways of being. And so I think the things that usher us into that connection is sacredness,
And I believe that those things that usher us into connection are man-made or person-made or human-made or whatever.
But what if someone can't be ushered? They lost the sense of ultimate meaning or connection.
Then they're out of touch with the sacredness.
Well, okay.
of God.
But then that puts the onus on them.
To me, that's the problem with associating sacredness with God. Like sacredness, that's why I think meaning is a better way to put it, because someone that maybe have lost all meaning, I don't believe that's necessarily a permanent place to be. Like we all kind of have moments in our lives where, obviously, for the three of us and probably many of the people listening, we live in a pretty nice culture and we haven't faced nearly the atrocities that the rest of the world has. But I think that sacredness can still be found, and just because someone's lost some kind of connection to something bigger, I don't think that that's necessarily mean it's gone forever. Yeah, well, we touched on this a little bit in our where I'm kind of going with this is we touched on this in our criminal justice episode, where we talked about doesn't matter what people have done, that they're still precious and they're still made in the image of God. But what if a person
loses so much touch with meaning that they commit atrocities and they're far away from sacredness. Is that how you guys would conceptualize this?
For me,
talk about
there's still this divine presence in the world reaching out toward people. So they may have forfeited their participation in sacredness, but God hasn't forfeited them. Does that make sense?
Okay.
There's still
it does make sense. What do you think, Jeff, though? Because you're saying something different.
I would agree with that. I would say that despite what someone has committed, that doesn't change the fact that they themselves, there's something sacred to them. My only thing is I necessarily wouldn't... I attach it to God in the sense that God is creator, and I believe we all have the image of God, and I don't think there's anything that we can do to separate that. But I don't think that if our actions dictate how sacred or not sacred we are, I think that's hugely problematic if we take that out to its complete end.
Yeah, but you said sacredness is constructed, so it's constructed of actions.
Mm-hmm.
And I said that with spaces and people. I mean, spaces and stories, but I think it completely breaks down with people because people are sacred, period.
But how are spaces and stories relevant without the actions of people?
Yeah, because the people themselves are sacred and they add that sacredness to it. So think of people as the salt shaker and stories and places as the vegetables and meat. Like the salt is always going to be salt, and they add and pepper and decide how much they're going to season those other two things. If that makes any sense. I don't know
For
if that's
you, humanity is sacred, and then humans infuse their sacredness in other things.
Exactly.
Stories,
What about
spaces, whatever.
Yes.
What about if sacredness, if someone's ultimate meaning is the self?
Yeah, but in Jeff's construction, they're still, and even in mine, they're still deriving their sacredness, whether they believe it or not, from God. At least in mine.
No, you can't superimpose that concept on some people. If their ultimate concept, their ultimate meaning, and I know people like this, they're atheistic humanists, and they believe that their ultimate form of meaning on this earth is the self, not God. So would you say that? I mean, and in that case, utterly self-motivated behavior is in keeping with sacredness. You know what I mean? So I think this starts to break down a little bit to some degree.
But not the sacredness from different vantage points. So sacred from my vantage point, you're right. If it was...
Well, you can superimpose a concept of God into those folks all you want, but it's not being true to what they're trying to tell you, right?
Sure.
It's not really listening to them.
Yeah.
I'm not saying you're doing that, but I'm saying we've all done that.
Yeah, but from different... So this conversation of sacred versus secular for someone who does not believe in God and does not believe in the sacredness of anything or the ultimate meaning of anything, right? Someone who's completely materialistic and says like, this is... Whatever, maybe they can find sacredness, but this conversation of sacred versus secular completely breaks down for them. Does that make sense? So,
Okay.
if we're going to talk about
That's
sacred versus if we're going to talk about sacred versus secular, we're necessarily engaging like maybe different thinking because that would not.
We're assuming that sacredness, that there is a form of separation between the two. We don't agree on what that is or even know what that is.
Yeah, and for me, sacredness comes from connection with God. And that's why I can say all of reality is, in a sense, sacred, because all of reality is dependent and connected to God. And I think that we as human beings have the ability to commune with God at a different level than, I don't know, a table or a rock or whatever. And I think that us engaging in that of our own volition, we can have different degrees of sacredness as people, depending upon how we help other people connect to God as well. So if
it is about connection, I do think that some people are more connected to the ultimate than other people. And so I think I would disagree with you, Jeff, and what you were saying earlier. Yes, I think there's a level to which all humans are sacred as far as considering humans worthy and worthwhile and precious and priceless. But I also think that some people have traditionally been considered holy in many different traditions because they seem to be more connected to the ultimate or to ultimate depth or ultimate meaning or life. Like Buddha, for example.
And in that, there's the whole setting apart of people, right? I mean, like the elders and leaders of different religious communities have been set apart for almost forever, for all of human history.
Well, is it set apart though? I mean, that term bothers me a lot.
So I know, and I would love to get to there. Could I trace for a second just kind of the history of at least like Christian or theology thinking up through till now about leaders and people who are considered sacred, and then we can comment on like, I would love to hear, especially Jeff, what you think about the role of people being sacred today. But to get there, maybe we can just survey for a second some of the ways that's happening.
Wait, before we get there though, I don't want to lose this thought. So when we set someone apart, as far as like if we want to use that term, as them being more sacred than someone else. To me, that doesn't mean that they're more sacred. They maybe have, I don't know, they may have done more, and people may consider them more sacred, but I can't get to a place where I can say that this person, just because they did this, or just because they had the opportunity to do this, and maybe this person would have done the same thing had given the same opportunities, that has to reflect, that may reflect how people perceive their sacredness, but I don't think it has any bearing on the fact that they are sacred.
But you said
you're
that
using it as a synonym for special almost. It seems like.
No, you're saying that human beings are the ones who determine what is sacred and isn't, and they're allowed to do that wherever they want, except when it's in reference to themselves, right? That's what it seems like. It sounds like it. And that's a really weird issue. I completely understand.
Well, part of my problem with this is as someone who's worked as a pastor in churches, I've had moments where people will call a church and they're in a hospital and they're either just really sick or even dying, and they call church and they just want to talk to a pastor. Like there's some kind of, like I had so many hospital visits with people I didn't know. I didn't know what to say. And the only reason they even had me there was because I happened to work at a church. And to me, that was silly. Like I'm thinking, and I understand that they have placed a certain sacredness on this position, but it didn't make me any different than them because of the path that I was on. And I was always uncomfortable. Like, someone's dying. Why isn't your family here? Why aren't you? And granted, sometimes they're not going to have family, but I don't know. But there are a lot of times. Go ahead.
Well, can I offer something? I would say in that situation, you are a walking, breathing, interactive symbol of the divine. And you, as a person, maybe this is a way to conceive of it, borrow or participate in the sacredness of the symbolicness of that position.
I volunteer actually at a hospital, and so I've been going through the process of thinking through all this as a volunteer chaplain. And I think that all that is like you can look at it as purely pragmatic. People have been trained in helping people find their own meaning. You don't even have to subscribe to any sort of ultimate meaning. You could just say chaplains are called upon. They'll call a church, they'll call a chaplain because they have this specific training to help people find meaning in their suffering or not in their suffering. And then as a Christian or as a theist, I feel like some people are trained or at least practice the ability to help people connect to the ultimate meaning. So you could pull anybody off the street or even a family member and say, hey, help me commune with, the divinity. They may not be comfortable with doing that, but you as a pastor, you do it all the time. And
yeah, but I think it goes way beyond training though, because a lot of times people don't even want to talk or they don't want to figure out answers. They just want a comforting presence in the room. For sure, it does. That reminds them of the ultimate. I think people participate in the sacredness of the position, and this position itself is a symbol, like the Pope. A lot of people ascribe sacredness to the position of the Pope. Therefore, the person who stands as the Pope in that time becomes more sacred because they're fulfilling that position.
See, this is where I kind of fall. I'm thoroughly, I don't know, the child of Protestant iconoclasm or whatever. And I think that for me, setting apart leaders, I really hear what Jeff is saying and I resonate with it. It doesn't give people any sort of ontological difference, sacredness or whatever. All it is, it's a community. All it is, so you think? Hold on. So all it is, in my opinion, is conferring opportunity upon individuals to do certain things.
I think it depends on the belief structure of the person who's interacting.
And recognition that God has called someone to something. So there is two elements to it.
Yeah, but see, that's what I'm saying. For me, in my upbringing, being Pentecostal, and part of this is just being a really bad Pentecostal and always rebelling against it in some way, shape, or form, even when I was in the midst of it. But the words and rhetoric associated with someone in leadership was God's anointed, calling, these huge, very sacred type of terms where you would say, oh, the anointing's on that person. The insinuation being it's not on that one because they're not, or that person because they're not in ministry. And that was my context. And I hated it so much because there was this, it created an unneeded hierarchy that I think leads to a lot of dangerous things down the line. And we can see that, I think, in Christian leadership that is quote unquote fallen from whatever pedestal they've been placed on. And to me, that's where my problem is. Maybe it was different rhetoric or different attitude towards leadership, but in my context, it was always very lofty words used to associate people who were in those positions.
Well, it's interesting though how that works sociologically, because when you're saying that person has the anointing, the attribution is the Holy Spirit's work, not that person. So it's kind of a very complex sociological toolkit to say this person says I'm special, but we're going to constantly remind the community that it's not because of them. And this goes along with the theology, like, I'm nothing before God, and God's just using me as a vessel, and God's just pouring out God's Spirit on me, or whatever people say. But there's that constant reminder that it's not supposed to be a focus on the person. So that's interesting that I understand how you had that experience, and I understand that it really leads to people being put on pedestals. And I think that's very dangerous. I completely agree with what you said. But the rhetoric is very intentionally trying to draw focus away from that.
But that's still, the rhetoric still is going to, that may be its intent, but even within that, it still points to people, meaning, so if it's all the Holy Spirit, then that adds to the fact that if I'm not in that position, then God didn't choose me.
This is where I feel like there's a tension in a lot of different ways of doing church. I think calling and ordination and God calling people to specific ministries, I think a calling doesn't mean nobody else has a calling. I think there's a lot of things in the Bible that talk about like the priesthood of all believers, the concept that all people have a sacred calling. And I think that just to say this person has a calling for this place at this time does not invalidate everybody else. But in some churches, that's the net effect. It shouldn't be that way, but it does.
It does, though, if you never say the opposite.
Absolutely. Yeah. That's and I get that. And I think that that's a tension that we're too often like let go one way or another instead of asserting that all people do have a calling, for sure. So throughout Christian history, right, it started with the elders and leaders further back. The apostles were selected by Jesus, and they had this, like kind of Mona's talking about, this symbolic participation in the symbol and in the meaning for the community. And they did select leaders in Acts, people that were going to do ministry for the community. And so one of the earliest people, Stephen, was said to have been filled with faith and a man full of the Spirit. And so they selected him along with other people. And it said that the community was pleased. And I think that, like, going back to that idea of it is not just God's calling, but a community of people seeing that and discerning that and like infusing that with meaning. You can see it as a both and, you know what I mean? It's a human action and a divine action at the same time. And then that plays out all throughout, at least Christian history. There was elders and presbyters in the early church. You had prophets and people like that. But then pretty soon, toward the end of the 2nd century, you had priests who sacredness was not just a calling, but it was more of like a political conferring from one person to another. And it's pretty interesting. There's people who become martyrs. So that we talked about this before in earlier episodes, but the martyrs become this really huge symbol, not just priests, but people who have gone the distance and suffered. And so people like Polycarp get burned, and then people collect their bones and ashes and store them because those bones and ashes have some sort of sacredness and meaning for the whole community. And then that goes on into like monks and mystics further on. And then pretty soon you have the old guy on the mountain, and everybody's going to him and asking advice and trying to connect with God because he's seen as this person who is very special. And I don't know what I think about that. Like, I agree that human beings can help usher others into connection with God, but there's this weird flip side of that coin that I think Jeff is talking about, that becomes a dangerous thing when you start locating all the sacredness in that person or in that symbol instead of the God that you're being connected to.
I'm thinking of this idea of people as symbols and how that translates really easily into modern marketing and people as mega brands. And I'm thinking of,
oh my gosh,
big people today, that are non-religious leaders that I think would be considered sacred to a lot of people. Like Oprah is a really good example. People like Oprah have been able to act as that mediator between people and ultimate meaning, and have inspired movements and a strong amount of like personal love from followers. Naomi Klein's book, No Logo, is very good, by the way, talking about this kind of phenomenon, but how now people can become super brands. And I think it's just borrowing this really old idea of participating in the symbol, of a person becoming a symbol. That's not a new concept, but we just have like telecommunications now that can like heighten and expand and make things infinitely more powerful and global.
Do you think that destroys the personhood of that person in some way?
I don't think anything can destroy the personhood of a person.
Or like at least like somehow move against that. Like they become so much of a symbol that they're no longer like a regular person.
Well, if we're thinking that all symbols are constructions, then people who act as symbols, like I don't know the Pope. I can know a lot of things about the Pope, but I know the construction of the Pope. I know the Pope is perceived by the media and by scholars and clergy around the world. I don't know the Pope as a human being. I know the Pope as a symbol. So I think the same principle applies for anything. And even like your parents as a symbol. You don't, it's funny getting to be a full grown adult. And then finally that day when you see your parents as people, it's like, whoa, that office of the parent is demystified and they become not a symbol and they come down off the pedestal. You see things that you didn't see before.
But for people themselves, and maybe Jeff, this is going toward what you were talking about, you having a problem. People start to see themselves as the symbol and not as a person. Right. They get lost in the idea of what they are, what they do, or they are this thing. And then you have, I don't know, unhealthy balance upon who you are as a human being. Because I think just right, like it doesn't matter if you're a priest or the Pope or this person, like you're still a person, you know?
Maybe it's when it transfers into importance. So for instance, like because of all that symbolism that's been attached to that one person, then in the eyes of many, their life becomes more important than the life of someone else.
Well, and I think a lot of times when that person loses sight of their humanity and loses sight of humbleness, they cease to function well as a symbol because they're not connected to ultimate meaning anymore. They're often like a fantasy world. So I think the people who are really good at maintaining a quote unquote sacredness of person throughout their whole life, as like a community symbol, as a special, are people who can really stay very grounded.
Do we all agree that like the thing is not the symbol, like the point is not the symbol, but it's either God, ultimate meaning, or people, right? And the symbol is maybe somehow a mediator between those two. And when we see the symbol as being more important than people, it tends to like cause problems, right? Or the symbol becomes more important than
I'm
God.
borrowing a lot of what I'm saying from Tillich. Tillich's concept of symbols.
Signaled and signifier or whatever.
Well, that's just modern semiotics. But Tillich talks about symbols as being gateways to the ultimate. And as soon as the symbol assumes that it itself is the ultimate, then it ceases to become a symbol, and Tillich would say it becomes an idol. So Tillich has a very gateway approach to the ultimate. And some people, more modern semiotics or language professionals, I won't even name names because it'll get too heady, but would say that we can't connect to ultimate meaning. So there's a wide variety of approaches to that. But yeah, I think the symbol, I think you're right, though. It's if the symbol is the ultimate, then it's no longer a symbol, it's the ultimate. Mm-hmm. So it has to be something that points to something else.
So it's the difference between asking a pastor to come be with you because they are helping you connect with ultimate meaning and then them just being that ultimate meaning, right?
Well, and maybe what Jeff was saying earlier, correct me if this is wrong, Jeff, is like the frustration is when people confuse you as the pastor, the symbol of connection, to you as the pastor, a magical being unicorn who's going to touch them and give them warm fuzzies because you are magic somehow.
When the line between the person and the thing is blurred. Because just like anything tangible, like when we talked about spaces and we talked about stories, I think when we incorporate people, we're talking about the people, but then we're also talking about their title or their position or what symbol they function as. And those are things that can have degrees of sacredness. But the person in themselves, if you strip all that away, there's an equal amount of sacredness to everyone else in the world who's ever been and ever will be, because that being, the person, is always sacred.
So we're using sacred as real and meaningful, whereas magic is the opposite of that. Yeah. Unless you're neo-pagan, and then magic refers to what is real and ultimately meaningful. So that's another conversation.
Sure.
But
your guys' there's something really interesting just came to mind. Your guys' background talks about anointing and that kind of thing. My background as like a non-denominational Baptist didn't have that at all. Like there was no talk of, the charismatic stuff or Pentecostalism.
So how did you guys identify leaders?
So sacredness, it's actually a child of like this first Great Awakening and the second Great Awakening in the 17 and 1800s, where the preacher was the thing. Like the preacher who could preach God's word and get people connected to God's word. There was like, back then there was a lot of weeping and, the preacher would be yelling and people would be emotionally moved. And actually Yale and Harvard dismissed the second Great Awakening because it was emotionalism. They thought that it was like, this is a bad thing.
Well, that's what Pentecostals would call anointing. That's just the word we use for trying to explain that.
So our word was gift. Like, oh, that person has a gift of teaching. And it was just this ability to like properly teach God's word. And then people would recognize it as God's word as it's being taught. And I think those are like semantics, because a lot of the same thing is happening between Pentecostals and like non-charismatics or people with Baptist backgrounds, or even Catholics. Like, for one, it's the sacrament. For the other, it's the anointing of the Spirit on people. For the other, it's the proper teaching of the word. But we always recognize there are these people who can do these functions for us. And so we set them apart in a way. We train them, or we give them titles. We recognize that they're doing this. And
I think part of the problem, too, is that a large portion of Christianity hasn't been able to divorce themselves from the rhetoric of Scripture, specifically the Old Testament, when it comes to leadership and...
Well, why would they? I mean,
you just want to move away. Text. You just want to move away from the Bible, Jeff. That's all it is.
I do. I hate the Bible. I hate everything.
See, I think we just need to recover the language of the Bible. It's just that we have all this unfortunate ways it's been used in the past.
I don't have a problem with the language of the Bible. I have a problem with thinking that the language of the Bible is static, that it's always going to be that way.
Were you being serious about hating the Bible?
No.
I mean, if that's okay,
No.
we just need to clarify that for listeners.
Sure.
Jeff does not vehemently hate the Bible.
Does not.
No.
No, it is interesting though that these are all terminology, sets of language that we use to try to identify this person is doing something that is kind of an archetypal set of behaviors, like teaching, preaching, encouraging, whatever, but they're doing it in a seemingly special way that's unique and creative and passionate, maybe. I think that might be kind of the common thread, is that how the person brings themselves to that thing, or how well they follow the formula and expand upon it, possibly.
Yeah. So when do we address the Hitler elephant in the room? Right?
Hitler has to come up at some point.
Well, with this conversation, because you know that's going to be a default for a lot of people is, well, what about guys like Hitler?
Well, Hitler was incredibly freaking charismatic. So what the common thing is to confuse charisma and persuasiveness with good intention and what is ultimately meaningful and good and true and loving.
Yeah, I think all people have sacredness, but they also participate in the sacred. And this is what I think I keep coming back up against, is like, we all have this potential in us and in this realized like sacredness, because we are connected to God in a very real way. And then we have the option of participating in that or not. And I think it's really interesting that we ask some people to become experts in participation with God, whether it's a monk or a priest or a pastor. And then on the opposite side, we ask people to specifically refrain from ushering us into ultimate meaning in that way, or ushering us to God. And I'm thinking of like politicians. And I know that like,
because that's too much freaking power for any one person to have.
Absolutely. And I am all for the separation of church and state, just because I think that it corrupts both in some ways. And that's never what Christianity was called to do. That's my own personal opinion. But I still struggle with like, we're asking these people who are in power to completely refrain from participating in the ultimate, at least in some way. And it's like,
people do though.
They do, because
I don't think
that's what
we
their
ask them to
humanity
do that
is.
culturally. Anyway, I think it's really taboo to ask someone culturally not to talk about God from a political soapbox. Oh my God. Did you watch the Republican debate? They all talk about, every single one of them talk about God. I know. Every single one of them.
So there is a really weird, complicated history with American religious institution and politics. There's a couple good books out there about it that people can
even within churches, like denominations that don't allow anyone but clergy to distribute the communion. You know what I mean? Like you're creating that line also. You're preventing someone else from ushering someone else into something sacred.
Yeah.
For some people, for some denominations, it is the clergy. Like it's only the male priests that can serve the sacrament. For others, and that's like because for example, Anglicans, they believe that because Christ was male, that Christ's maleness is the proper conveyor of the feast. I completely disagree with this, but this is what they argue. But for other people, they want people who have other congregations. They want people who have training and who are trained well enough to quote unquote get their heart in the right place before serving. So it's less about the actual. I think this is what's true of a lot of congregations. It's less about the actual sacredness and specialness of the actual person, and more about the state of mind and heart through which you perform those tasks.
Because the symbol is so important. I think that's what it comes back to. It's like there are, at least in Protestantism, like two most important symbols, right? Baptism and serving of the Lord's communion. And because those symbols are so special, we ask people to deal with them appropriately. And maybe that's not the way to go, but that's definitely how some people have chosen to interpret those.
But I think overall, for me, the biggest thing that I think about a lot, and this is after interacting with people who've gone to really highfalutin schools and have done all these things. And I really do think, though, that concepts of prestige, whether that's about a person or an institution, can really blind us. Having stars in your eyes for anything can blind you to a lot of painful realities. And I think that more than anything, that goes for people who are traditionally considered sacred and untouchable, because a lot of people, like we've talked about, this concept of sacred is also a concept of untouchability and unchallengeability. And so I think sacredness in people can be incredibly dangerous in that respect.
Maybe it's because when we have stars in our eyes, or we ascribe something as super sacred, we're turning off a part of our human meaning-making power. We're saying that has meaning, and therefore I should not bring any meaning to it. I have no responsibility as far as participating or infusing what I think that is or whatever. And so we stop engaging in our ability to make meaning, and we just sit there and be passive people who respond to it. You know what I'm thinking? And I think that maybe a better way of looking at sacredness is the both and. Yes, there is the divine reaching out to us. Yes, there are people and symbols and ideas that connect us better than others, maybe, to that ultimate meaning. But in no step in the process should we be sacrificing the other side of the equation, that humanity and humans are what makes things sacred. And so we have a responsibility to participate in that, not in a highly romanticized way. We're not fans sitting at a football game cheering on the foot. You know what I mean? It's not like this fandom as far as religious experience goes. It should be something that we are fully engaged in to support or not support. I think the onus is definitely on us.
Well, no, I think there is, okay, no, so you said that we're not sitting on the sidelines cheering somebody on, but there is a level of human achievement and dedication that not everybody achieves. Not everybody will give 5 years of their life fighting pandemics in a really poor country.
Sure.
Not everybody will dedicate their bodies to Olympic athletic training. You know, and those things are symbols of what humans are capable of. And so I think there is a level of sitting on the sidelines and cheering when you're watching someone else grapple with sacredness and ultimate meaning, I guess.
Yeah, but there's still a participation in it. Just because that person did that doesn't mean I forfeit my call to discern for myself and have critical thinking about things. You know what I mean? Just because they're a priest or a pastor or whatever doesn't mean I no longer have a responsibility to engage the divine or see what's see what's sacred and not. Determine for myself what is sacred and not. Sometimes we're just told this is sacred, and that's breaking that bond between divine and human.
But determining for yourself what's sacred or not takes you out of the community that has determined something sacred too.
I would say
I think that's pretty contextual. It's
not just individual, but whole communities do it. And you see that in Acts. Like I was saying, the community discerned that Stephen was full of faith and the Spirit, and they recognized that and set him apart for that service. You know what I mean? It is a communal thing, not just individual.
Well, and I think it says a lot about what the community holds as sacred. So for instance, if you look at, let's compare Bill Cosby and Jared from Subway. So you
oh God. Wait, you have to recap that. I just found out about this.
You did?
So
it's been on. Yeah.
So Bill Cosby had for a long time a certain reputation. And when these allegations against Bill Cosby started to come up about him drugging women and raping them, there was a lot of division. Some people so I would see on Facebook and all over the place, some people would be trying to defend him, others not. So there was this division. It was difficult to grasp. How can this happen? Because of all the things that Bill Cosby represented. So Jared from Subway got caught with child porn and having sex with minors and all this kind of stuff. I haven't seen anyone trying to defend him because what he represented was sandwiches. He was a spokesperson. There was nothing that there was no communal sacredness attached to what he did or what made him a symbol. So there may be isolated pockets of, people holding up signs saying free Jared or whatever. But there's something to be said about what that person symbolizes and how that's a reflection of what the community itself holds as a high value.
Because Cosby was about family and Jared was about healthy eating, right? And for sure.
Well, Cosby wasn't just about family. Cosby was about like this show of family values of African American family rising out of, not rising out of poverty, but representing an alternate vision in the media, first of all. And second of all, I don't know if you ever remember watching Kids Say the Darndest Things, where Cosby, who's a child psychology expert, would interview these children and they would say innocent, like that show represents like this incredible innocence of children being themselves and not having any inhibition. So I think a lot of people took that really hard because of those two, like these multiple threads in Cosby's career, that he was a clean comedian, that he represented, like you're saying, Jeff, not just family values, but like what family ought to be and what innocence ought to be.
So those symbols really make it easier, difficult for us to separate that sacredness from the person, or separate that person's perceived sacredness from what they did and who they are.
So is his career not sacred because he did a lot of good work now that he's himself, his reputation is sullied as a person?
So that's the question.
Always the question.
And I would say within our culture, yes, at least for a time.
Unfortunately, we have, because we put people on pedestals so much, it negates everything they did. And I've seen this on a local church level, like leaders will have this big falling and then it negates everything they did. But like in reality, they should never have been necessarily on a pedestal in the first place, right? And the stuff they did still matters and still counts in some way.
It does, but in those moments, like look at Michael Jackson. For the longest time, he wasn't going to be able to sell an album or do a concert, but when he died, all that seemed to be gone, like erased. Like there was that stigma was all but gone, and a lot of the way that people talked about who he was and what he accomplished. So I think part of it's just more of a reflection, not the sacredness of that person, but what we as a community hold sacred and how easily we can throw it away and pick it up again.
Yeah, that's actually kind of I think that's like the American spirit. We love to see people, at least as a society, like fall from. We love seeing icons being torn down because that's kind of how we've been established, is like removing the sacred things, throwing the tea in the water and saying, no, we're not going to obey your kingship. And so when we see like this celebrity who stands for all these things fall, it's like, see, I knew that was going to happen. I knew there was nothing sacred. I don't know.
So do you think that's us like punishing and encouraging, like dissuading people in the future from taking that same behavior?
I think it's more a reflection of desire for people to want to be better than they are. To hope that if someone else can do it and not be flawed, then maybe I have the chance to do it and not be flawed. I think it goes back to a little bit with Alan, what you were talking about with the whole kind of American ideal of, we have these ideals and we want to live to it. And I think that's part of the problem with the way that people look at things. Like, if it's connected to what we consider sacred. So, for instance, I've already seen certain Christians defend Josh Duggar and the whole Ashley Madison thing, and because it's so connected to the things that they consider sacred, that it's hard for them. If they separate that person, then they have to start reevaluating the things. And I think that that's true for all of us. I think that there's people did that with Bill Cosby. Obviously not Jared, unless you really loved Subway. I mean, because there's still that. He's just a spokesperson or a mascot for a company or whatever. I think that how we treat public symbols is more of a reflection of what the community thinks is sacred, as opposed to whether or how sacred that person is.
I agree with everything you said, except I think it's a little bit different. I think Americans expect people to be corrupted. And I think it's more like a, haha, see, I told you so. I knew they couldn't be that great.
That's what I was trying to say, though.
I read stuff that there's a shift in that after Nixon, that maybe before it was closer to what I said, but now it's closer to what you say, just because of how that idea of someone in public figure has been slowly picked away to where now we're more cynical. I'd probably fall in line with that more, the way that you word that.
No, it's interesting though. I mean, why do we expect people to have a dark underbelly? Maybe that's just what we think of as ultimately human.
Perhaps. So maybe really what's sacred is the fact that we suck.
That's the truth of life.
No,
we all suck.
No. I think we're protecting ourselves. I think it does come down to like no meta narratives are better than any other. And when someone stands up and says my ultimate meaning and my symbol is very important, we're against that, just kind of like as a default setting these days, which is fine with me. I think
after 3 weeks,
perfection is hard to relate to, isn't it?
It is.
Yeah.
That's my takeaway. I think.
So, hey, that's actually, I've been thinking a lot since you said that a couple episodes ago about perfection being this weird ideal. I think that like rereading through the Bible and looking at it, like perfection's a very Greek ideal that got imposed upon a lot of like real world things. Perfection's not this. Anyway, it's a really cool idea that you brought up, and I've been thinking about it.
Thanks, bro.
Oh, you're welcome, cuz.
Well, I think after 3 weeks of talking about secular versus sacred, we can safely assume that we have solved nothing.
Nothing is sacred anymore.
But that we've created, hopefully, sacred spaces for people to have conversations about these particular issues. And
I would offer when it comes to, sacred versus secular, it's really just 50 Shades of Gray.
Oh my gosh.
Oh, wow. Nice.
The whole time we've been talking about this, I just keep hearing in my mind that in the Incredibles, that villain's like floating in the air and he says, when everybody's super, nobody will be. And so I just keep thinking about how if everybody's
that guy
sacred,
kind of reminds me of
will
you.
Be. Really? That's
a
unfortunate.
No capes.
Anyway, so let us know what you think. You can respond to the show notes at irenicast.com/26. And there you can also find informational links to go a little bit deeper about this week's topic. And don't forget, every Wednesday on Facebook, we'll have our question of the week related to this episode. This week, on the other side of the music, we are going to be bringing back our game, Name That Sound. So we are bringing back Name That Sound. So if you didn't hear this before, basically what's going to happen is I'm going to share a sound clip, and then our two illustrious hosts, Alan and Mona, are going to try to guess what that sound is. I think the last time we did this, you two guessed all of them because it
was all you making breakfast.
No,
it was
open. There was one you were like opening the DVD player over and over. We couldn't figure out.
Oh, that's right. Okay.
Hey, I have one for you, Jeff. What's this?
That's you eating cocoa nibs.
Dude. Exactly. Look at that. This game's too easy, Jeff.
How about this one?
I didn't hear anything.
You eating puffins.
No, I was taking a drink of water. You're both wrong. I don't know.
Oh,
let's play the game.
Let's do it.
Yeah, let's play the game. Let's keep the sound effects to the professionals over here.
Okay.
Fine.
That's
Okay.
what you're good at. You have an anointing for that kind of thing.
All right, so I promise I will give you a hint. There's not one breakfast related item in this set of sound effects. So rest assured you will not have to listen to my eggs and bacon and coffee.
Last time it was like, eggs, coffee beans.
It made me hungry. I mean, just going to say.
Okay. Are you ready for the first one?
Mm-hmm.
Ready.
Opening and shutting a treasure chest filled with small gold coins made of chocolate.
Oddly specific.
No. That's what I heard, man. Those sound waves? No.
I'm going to go with opening a can.
No.
Like the latches on a chest.
I guess that's sort of close. It's actually the latch on a gate.
A gate.
So opening and closing a gate.
I can hear it now.
Nice. What's the next one?
Next one. Ready?
That's easy.
Striking a match?
Ooh, that's actually really good. I was going to say like shoveling dirt. What is it?
It's shoveling dirt.
Ooh.
Oh, damn it.
1-0.
Oh.
Alan and his cocoa nibs are ahead.
Wow. All right. This one, I don't know. I can't tell if this one's going to be easy or not, but I'll let you decide.
So easy.
Blinds.
Yep.
Yeah. Okay.
Lines. So 2-1.
No, I said it first, yo.
No, I didn't.
That was my point.
I said so easy.
I don't care. I can't read your
You
mind.
get a point. You don't have to. You don't not get a point because you didn't say it first.
Yeah, that's right.
Because he could have
So
disagreed with
2-1.
you.
But I said it, and you're like, "Oh yeah, Mona's got a good idea there. I'm gonna go with that one."
Yeah,
I
pretty
know
sure
how
that's
your
what
brain
I
works.
I'll let you two keep track of who's winning and who's losing.
Pretty sure it's me.
Okay. This one I don't know if you'll get.
That was really long.
Yeah, sorry.
Dryer.
It's a dry. I was gonna say a washer.
That's your final guess? A dryer and a washer?
Yeah.
Yeah.
That is incorrect. That is not even close, actually. It is the lowering and raising of my barbecue grill. So I have it like on a crank, and it goes up and it comes down, so you can like adjust its level to the heat.
That's like
Very
a tri-tip
quickly.
machine, man.
It
You're
is.
just
Oh
It
yeah,
is.
one of those big redwood,
it's so
firewood.
good.
Yeah. Okay.
And can you tow that behind your car? I'm pretty sure you can,
I
right?
could.
Oh, you have a giant one.
A giant one.
It's pretty big.
Wow.
It's not giant.
pretty awesome.
I've had
How much?
giant ones in the past, but this is normal size. Well, through churches, we'd always have the trailer one that we take to like camp and stuff.
I saw you cook like 6 tri-tips at once.
On the little one that I have here, yeah. The most I ever did was 12 at once on one of those big trailer ones.
I would be so scared I was going to get it wrong. Like if I have to cook one piece of meat that's stressful enough, I can't even imagine cooking 12 huge loaves of meat. I think last time we played this game, I called tri-tip loaf, and you thought that was a really bad analogy. I still stand by it. I think it looks like
it's the proper term.
Like.
Really? Loaf.
No.
Tri-tip loaf is the right term.
No way.
It is in my world.
Yeah, it is.
No way. A loaf of tri-tip?
That's what I've heard ever since I've lived.
For those of you who don't know what tri-tip is, we all are from the same area in California, and it's famous for this specific type of barbecue that uses a tri-tip cut of a beef.
Well, you guys
body?
are in the same area.
Well,
I know
yeah.
good tri-tip until I visited, and oh my goodness.
Yeah.
Oh my
it's
goodness.
Quite delicious.
It is.
It really is.
It's the best.
So when you
We always
'cause
end
you-
up talking about food in the
We
game.
do.
I know, right?
Time.
So you cook it in a roast, and it kind of, because if you brown it properly, it looks a little bit like, I assume this is where it came from. I don't know for sure, but I've always heard the term after it's been cooked as a loaf. And because it kind of looks like it's brown like bread, and it's got the nice, I'm really hungry now. All right, stop talking about it.
Next sound.
Okay, this is the final sound.
Ooh, wait. So right now, Alan's winning. Let's see what happens.
You have to bring that up again, don't you?
I'm the kind of person playing tennis where I'm like, I'll say if I'm winning, like just say the score twice just so they know what it is when we start playing.
So what you're saying is we shouldn't play tennis with you.
No, you should not. Be competitive.
All right, you ready?
Mm-hmm. Mashing brains.
I have a really weird one. I think it's
Mashing brains.
the turning of a door handle over and over.
My second guess was going to be walking on grass.
Grass? What kind of
Gravel.
Grass, what
Walking
kind of
on
grass
gravel.
Do you have? What kind of grass do you have out there, Mona? Jeez.
You know, East Coast grass.
East Coast grass is horrible.
Mhm.
West California grass is happy.
You are both incorrect and way off.
All right.
Way off.
What is
So it was those Mylar balloons,
Oh.
and it was just like a bouquet of them, and I was just shaking it. It was the balloons hitting each other.
How are we supposed to guess shaking balloons? That's not even
Hey,
like.
that was good. That was good.
There's
You
a
had to
very
come with a
distinct
hard
sound
one.
to it. I had to. You guys
You had to.
got every single one last time, so I needed to
You're
up my
right.
game.
You did. You up your game. Pretty good.
So now I think you only got 2, both of you, right?
No, the final score was Alan 2, Jeff 1 with Cocoa Nibs, and Mona 1 with blinds.
I think
Hey,
actually,
we never
Alan, you and I are
scored.
tied because I guessed the correct answer first.
But I said it.
So I'm going to go with Mona's rules, which
Sounds
are
good.
we're all tied.
Wow.
We're
And then
all sacred.
we all won, which means nobody won.
Everybody's
A
special.
total side note with cocoa nibs, if you
Mhm.
want to, you can add them to cookie dough
chocolate.
batter if you like a little crunch in your
Ooh.
chocolate chip cookie.
Yum.
It's
So
really
we
good.
are back on the kitchen thing.
It is.
Yeah.
Sorry. I had to say it. I had to say it.
Awesome.
All right. Well, I think that'll do it for us this week. Thank you so much for joining us. If you like what you hear, you can help support the show by going to iTunes to rate, review, and subscribe. Your ratings really help the show make it much easier for people to find the show. Also, tell a friend. Contact us anytime on our feedback page at irenicast.com/feedback, and there you'll find all the ways you can contact us. So for this week, I'm Jeff.
I'm a winner.
And I'm Alan.
Thanks for joining the conversation.